You're listening to Vote Her In, a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. On today's episode, we're speaking with Carolyn Bourdeaux, the Democratic nominee in the Georgia 7th District, the district CNN calls the most likely to flip red to blue in 2020. Hi, everyone. This is Kelly, and you're listening to Vote Her In, which is a collaboration between Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. We are coming to you now less than 2 weeks from what we call the end of election season. The end-ish. So we are super excited about this election and want to vote her in all the way up and down the ballots. So I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca now, who will introduce our guest. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Kelly, and good morning. And good morning to all of you who are listening. I think it'll be evening when you first hear this show. We're, as always, thrilled to be with you and thrilled to have a very special guest with us. Today, we are looking and talking to Carolyn, whose race in suburban Georgia was just declared by CNN this morning the number one district most likely to flip in the congressional campaign. So this is a really exciting time for us, of course, for her. And by way of a little bit of background, we thought it would be, as Kelly pointed out, just 2 weeks out, so important to talk to a woman who really is showing the way of new leadership in Congress, in her district for years, and what women can do when they just put their minds to it in such a critical time. So as you may know, she comes to us having run once before and lost very narrowly in 2018, a professor, a public policy expert, a former congressional aide. And for me personally, it's particularly special because her cousin, Lisa Percy, also a very distinguished Democratic woman activist, is a dear friend and one of the women I profiled in my first book, Every Day is Election Day. So welcome, Carolyn. We're just delighted that you're here with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Good to be here.
So we thought we would start actually by asking Carolyn if she would share with us, how she came to decide to run for office, particularly in a place that, at least until recently, was certainly not a likely place for a Democrat with the kinds of progressive positions she has to be elected. So if you would, Carolyn, just share with our listeners your route to making this decision and running this campaign.
Right. So, I live in Swanee, Georgia with my husband and my 8-year-old son. And my day job is I teach public policy and public finance at Georgia State at the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies. And as you mentioned, I have been in policy roles really throughout my life. I worked in Washington for several members of Congress and for a U.S. Senator. Here in Georgia, I was director of the Senate Budget and Evaluation Office and helped the state balance the budget during the Great Recession. I founded the Center for State and Local Finance. So I've really spent my life in the policy world, but not necessarily in the political world. I got into this race for a couple of reasons. One was the destruction of the Affordable Care Act. And it's something, if you're a policy person who has worked in sort of the big picture policy issues, healthcare has been something we've been struggling with for many decades. Actually, when I started in Washington back in 1992, after Clinton was elected, obviously he proposed one of the first comprehensive healthcare reform pieces of legislation. And that went down, and we've proceeded to struggle with it really ever since. And then Obama got through the Affordable Care Act. And after that, what I saw sort of from the vantage point of Georgia was a very concentrated and focused effort to try to destroy that piece of legislation. There was efforts to defund it, litigate against it. And in Georgia, we did not expand Medicaid. So my first steps away from sort of the nonpartisan, staff out there putting out the policy briefs on good government and educating young people about public service. My first step away from that was not something that should have been political or partisan, but it was advocacy for the expansion of Medicaid and my extraordinary frustration that Georgia did not do that. By failing to expand Medicaid in this state, that's between $2.2 and $3 billion a year. The state basically returns to the federal government, and it's about 500,000 people without health insurance. And it just seemed to me that our elected officials had lost their line of sight to the people of this district and this state. The other big motivator was probably, like for many women, waking up on November 9th of 2016 and finding out that Donald Trump had been elected president. And I just sat down with friends, family, and neighbors, and we said, we are not going to go down this way. This is not what our country stands for. It is not what we believe in. And so I got into the race for Georgia 7. And it has been a long journey, as you mentioned. It's been 3 years, but we have seen some of the highest growth in new Democratic voter turnout in the country in this district as we have campaigned across the diverse communities here and just, let people know that they have all options and alternatives. It does not have to be this way.
You obviously have a terrific professional background to bring to Congress, but you also have personal experiences that help shape you and what you would advocate for. You talk in your bio about this time when your father quit his job as a professor and started a business selling paper animal hats, which sounds fascinating. But then the business went under during the recession. So you have experience with bankruptcy. You also, of course, are a mom of a school-age kid. And we know that there are just not that many moms of school-age kids in Congress. So can you talk a little bit about your personal experiences and how those help drive the policy and legislative priorities that you would focus on in Congress?
So, yeah, a real pivotal moment in the life of my family was the hat business, as we refer to it. My father was a professor of education, so he taught teachers how to teach, and was really passionately committed to education. But there was this period where he burned out, and he decided to leave his tenured job at Hollins College and go into business for himself, selling these beautiful silk-screened paper animal hats. And my mother was an artist, also a teacher, but an artist, and she designed them. And he just fell in love with them and decided he just needed to do something different. He wanted to bring joy into the world. And so we do 54 craft shows a year. And every weekend, the vans would roll out from our driveway, and I would go stand out on the streets and I would hawk these paper animal hats. And it was sort of this really quirky thing. And I was getting ready to go to college. And like a lot of young folks, I wrote a sample essay for a college application. And mine was how you sell a paper animal hat in the rain. And everybody thought, oh, this is really creative and funny. And young people from my community, never really thought about going out of the South or out of state to school. Someone had handed me an application to Yale University, and I was a good student, but it was not really part of my worldview. But I was like, okay, oh heck, I'll give it a try. So I filled out that application and I slapped on that essay, which was about 5 pages over the limit, and I sent it in and I got in. And it was this wonderful thing for my family and my community that here was this local girl made good. And I really do, while I was a good student, I worked very hard in school, to get into schools like the Ivy League schools, it often takes some kind of creative twist, right, to get you in. And I always attributed my acceptance to the hat story. And so you never know where things like, a hat business is going to take you. So I went to Yale. It was wonderful. I got to meet amazing people. But while I was there, we hit the recession of the early 90s and the hat business went under and my family lost everything, including our house. And there was obviously some question about whether I'd be able to continue at this wonderful institution. But I went on a Pell Grant and Perkins loans and Stafford loans, and people in the community chipped in to help me make it. And I, of course, worked very long hours, and I made it through. And when I graduated, the student loan officer sat me down and said, young lady, you have a tremendous amount of debt. You need to get a job right away. So I definitely have a special place in my heart for young people who struggle with student debt as they're trying to make their way in the world. But my father sat me down and said, Carolyn, I don't want you to ever forget that this country invested in you. It gave you this world-class education. And with that comes a responsibility to give it back to your community. And that's really formed sort of, you have these pivotal, these little conversations in life, these little turning points that are these sort of jewels strung together across the course of your life. And that was one of these real turning points where I was like, okay, that's what my life is about. I'm about public service. And so I ended up going into public service. And, of course, my parents were teachers as well. And so just have really had this family with a very deep commitment to public service, to social justice, to reform and trying to, work within your community to strengthen it and make it better. I am a mother, of course, of an 8-year-old, and, I'm deeply concerned about his future, as I think many of us are right now. What are we leaving for our children? What kind of democracy? Are we going to address climate change? Are we going to address some of the very important conversations that need to be had in our community about racial justice as well?
You talked about your life of public service, and we're, of course, glad that you made that decision. When I was preparing for this interview, I was looking at a recent ad of yours, I think it was, which said, I won't give up, I won't back down. And if I had a mantra also, that would be it for me too. But in that context, you also have the chance as a professor, of course, to teach a lot of students about not only being courageous and strong, but about how to be successful in the public sphere. And of course, here we're particularly interested in women leaders. I'm wondering whether you could share with us, if it's the case, what you stress to your women students versus your male students, what you find they want to hear and learn from you as they think about their own careers in public service.
So I would say I teach the same thing to everyone, but I am sure that my women students take away different messages from it. And I share a lot of the stories of my experience in public service, and as well as my research. Have written a lot about sort of different situations in public sphere. I actually wrote my dissertation about the public debate over siting landfills and incinerators and these ferocious battles that happen over those issues. And certainly one thing I point out to everybody is the real importance of persistence over time when you are advocating for change, and that what we think of today is often inevitable, was not inevitable. And I'm sure you know that as well, having looked at policy and politics yourself in the public space. It really takes a tremendous amount of work to make change many times. Every once in a while, it happens sort of magically. But for the most part, it takes decades of persistent work. And I talk about that in these battles over, people who decided to fight the site for a landfill. I talk about it in my own work on the budget, as well as, bigger picture things like the civil rights movement and just the work and sacrifice it takes to get things done. The other thing very important in my life, I've been reflecting a lot on my father recently, but he really believed deeply in moral courage, and that if you saw something wrong in your community, saw something that needed to be changed, that you really do have an obligation to address it. If you're in that position in your life to do it, you are called, therefore, to go fix it. And I feel like this race, to some degree, I was in this unusual position in my life where I had the space to run for office. My son was in a good spot. My husband's in a good spot. Financially, we're relatively stable. We're able to do it at this time. And given that it was a responsibility to step up on behalf of my community and the country to do this race. So that's also, very important to me, and something I talk about a lot with my students. And we talk a lot about courage and, what it takes to make change.
In this election cycle, you have been endorsed by President Obama, Vice President Biden, Stacey Abrams, who's one of my personal heroes, among many others. Can you talk a little bit about what you have developed in terms of political skills and messaging strategies over the past cycle and now this cycle that helps both position your race to be, basically the most competitive in the country, but also to get these kinds of endorsements from such incredible people.
Yeah, it's been this wonderful honor. And, the highlight of 2018 was campaigning with Stacey Abrams and then having President Obama come to the community. I told everybody, most of this race has just been gritty work. But every once in a while, you get to meet somebody who is really a star and someone who you really, really deeply admire. And so that was wonderful. And also, Congressman John Lewis had endorsed me before he passed away and was someone who was a real role model in my life. And Andrew Young is someone who's been a mentor to me and a really staunch ally as I run this race. And what we've worked very hard to do is to build this diverse coalition of people in this district. It is a very diverse district, one of the most diverse in the Southeast. And the work I started doing way back in July of 2017 was, as we say here in Georgia, was visiting with people and just spending the time to be with people in the different churches, in the mosques, in the synagogues, in the temples. We have a Muslim community here, a Hindu community here. We have it's Korean, it's Vietnamese, it's Black, it's Hispanic. And to take the time to be with those communities and have been very honored to have sort of this wonderful, diverse group of people who are supporting this campaign in this race. And what we've seen, so just to give you a sense of the change that we're seeing here, over 100,000 people have registered to vote in this district since 2016. When I ran, I had a primary originally back in 2018, and about 30,000 people voted, and 1/3 had never voted in a Democratic primary before. When I ran again, I had another primary back in June of this year. 85,000 people voted in the Democratic primary, and over 50% had never voted in a Democratic primary before. So it's just this extraordinary surge of people waking up and being engaged for the first time. It is young people, it is people of color, it is old people, it is white people, it is Black, it is Hispanic. It is just, this extraordinary group of people standing up and saying no to what's happening in this country. And we want change. We need reform in this country.
And we also, as you are exemplifying, and as John Lewis did as well, making good trouble came to mind as you were talking here. And in that context, here we're particularly focused on what women can do as leaders. And we're looking forward to seeing you in the Congress. And in that context, would like to hear from you about the kinds of policies you think the women members of Congress specifically should unite behind, the kind of good trouble they should be making on behalf of the women and girls of our country.
There's obviously the big picture things that need to happen. We need to take care of ourselves a bit. We need representatives who care about the people they represent. And there's this investment we need to make in healthcare and education and infrastructure. We need to renew our democracy, and that's about voting rights and campaign finance reform, and also sort of this ongoing conversation, discussion we need to have about racial justice. But women also, and I think we have seen threats to our rights in ways we have never seen before. And I'd put top among those is choice. I think women need to come together and we need to establish a few things in this country. One of them being reproductive rights, that we do have control of our own bodies and that we codify Roe v. Wade. But beyond that, like many professional women, we just struggle. And this country is particularly poor at supporting us in working and having a family. We don't have paid family medical leave, and that's a pretty straightforward policy that some states have already adopted that we can put forward for women. We need quality childcare. I love the story that Elizabeth Warren tells about how the only reason she was able to get through law school was because she had a compliant child and a bag of M&Ms.
Right.
And she had to potty train her daughter, I believe. And I think every working woman in the country is like, I know that moment where you're just, your child is, you're just trying to get to work while you're taking care of your child. And it's just, it's such a tough situation so many times. Having universal pre-K, is an obvious first step in that respect. Equal pay for equal work. There are just some baseline reforms that I am sure and I hope we can all get together and get through in the next Congress.
So as we close this episode, maybe you could just share any other thoughts you have about sort of this moment in history. It's almost cliche at this point to say this is the most important election of our lifetimes, but it absolutely is. Yeah. and how women can come together. Despite the wave of women that came into Congress in 2018, they still make up less than a quarter of the House of Representatives. Yep. Something like 60% of the House is still white men. So what can we continue to do? Continue to push forward to come together as an ongoing force to make sure that we do get a healthier, a safer, and a more just America.
Well, I've been enormously encouraged by the next generation coming along. We had, this political moment is in many ways powered by women. I do have some wonderful men involved as well, but, by far the volunteers, who are showing up and just powering this moment are women from very diverse backgrounds who are pushing forward this change that we're seeing in this district and in Georgia. And we just need to keep that moving. We have an extraordinary slate of women who are running at the state, House, and Senate level here in Georgia. From very diverse backgrounds, Hispanic, Korean, Chinese, Black, Jamaican American. I mean, just amazing group and very, very talented. And building that, continuing to build on that. We had the Black Lives Matter protests here, and it was just these high school students, again, many of them women, not all, but certainly a good chunk, and just stepping up and saying, we want everybody to meet at the town center at this time. And thousands of people would show up from diverse backgrounds. And it was down home, but it was just this wonderful moment where the community came together. And I have great hope for the next generation. A lot of this change is being driven by the young folks in this country as well. So everybody get out there and vote. And we have to put our foot on the gas. This election is just the beginning of the change we need in this country.
That is great to hear. And Carolyn, in order for our listeners to help make that change, if you would share with them as we close and say thank you, your website so they can learn more about you, contribute in whatever way they can to what we hope will be a big victory in a couple of weeks. So thank you, and please share that as we close.
Sure. You can go to carolynforcongress.com. Pretty easy. and thank you guys so much for doing this and for having me.
Absolutely.
Oh, you're very welcome.
The Vote Her In segment is a collaboration of Two Broads Talking Politics and author Rebecca Sive. Our theme song is called Are You Listening off of the album Elephant-Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast. You can contact us at twobroadstalkingpolitics@gmail.com or on Twitter or Facebook at Two Broads Talk. You can find all of our episodes at twobroadstalkingpolitics.com or anywhere podcasts are found.